What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Thursday, May 23rd edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we have an early start time today, 12:35 Eastern. So kicking this show off early. Going to try and keep it pretty brief as well. Only 6 games, and I talk fast, so it shouldn't be that difficult. But going to try and leave myself 30, 40 minutes to make lineups after the show. So try and keep this to around 30 minutes or so. But as always, if you have questions, throw them in chat. Happy to talk strategy, whether it's slate specific, overall DFS, whatever it may be. Hit the thumbs up button, give the show a like, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. And as always, if you are watching this back in the very short window between when this show ends and lock, you can figure out which game I'm talking about by which one is highlighted up at the top. Starting with the Yankees and the Mariners, Luis Gil on the mound. Luis Gil on the mound for the Yankees, going up against Luis Castillo. So two of the better pitchers on the slate facing off in this one in Yankee Stadium. Obviously a much more difficult matchup for Castillo than for Gil, but he's still projected for around 20% ownership. Showed up in 23% of the lineups I built. There's no real way around it on a 6-game slate where you don't have the best pitching. There are a few studs, but Castillo is one of them from a talent standpoint, striking out about 27% of hitters, 3.38 xFIP this season. Now, it is a brutal matchup against the Yankees. It is a negative park shift for Castillo going into Yankee Stadium. His home park is one of the best places to pitch in baseball. Yankee Stadium is not. So he certainly has things working against him, but he is reasonably priced at $9K, does give you strikeout upside. So yeah, on a 6-game slate, just looks pretty good. Luis Gil looks like the bigger priority, 37% projected ownership, showed up in 28% of the lineups I built. So I think he's going a little bit over-owned, but still one of the better pitchers on the slate. He is $10,000, so he's expensive, but he gets to face this Mariners team that just strikes out constantly. Highest strikeout percentage in baseball against right-handed pitching this year at 28.7%. They have a 100 WRC plus. They do supposedly have talented hitters in this lineup. They just haven't really come through so far this season. Gil has very, very good stuff, striking out 31.2% of hitters, 3.64 xFIP. He does walk too many guys, 13.5% walk percentage, but other than that, he's just been really good. He hasn't given up power this year either, only about half of a home run allowed per 9 innings. In terms of expected power, nothing there either. Sub 100 expected ISO to righties, 138 to lefties. He's just been really, really, really good. Scrolling through chat, never listened to me at 1.5 speed. Yeah, I've actually, when I go back and watch these shows specifically to see how fast I'm talking, I've been surprised that I'm not talking faster at regular speed, but I can't imagine watching at 1.5x. Ryan Feltner, never again. But yeah, I will end up talking about why he's a great pitcher, probably. The offenses here are tricky because they do have difficult matchups against Castillo and against Gil, but it is still Yankee Stadium. It is two offenses that have power. Seattle's showing up in the middle of the pack as far as all stack types go. Yankees are second from the bottom, but keep in mind when you look at the exposures over here, 10% of the lineups I built have Yankee stacks, 20% are San Diego stacks, which is third, but then it drops off a bit where, 14% on these stacks in the middle. So the Yankees are towards the bottom, but it's not by a massive margin. 5-man stacks, they do get pulled up a little bit. It's a high upside spot against Castillo. The problem, of course, is just that he is a good pitcher, but you do have a ton of power in the Yankees lineup. Castillo does have home run issues as well. Lefties in particular can do some damage against him. 206 expected ISO to left-handed hitters this year, 350 expected WOBA, 211 expected ISO against them since the start of last year. This obviously isn't the best park for pitchers that give up production to lefties as well. So Juan Soto in particular, once again, looks really good. But if you can get to some Rizzo, some Verdugo at reasonable price tags, no issues with that either. On the other side for the Mariners, the reason that you would get to them in tournaments is that they are cheap. They do have power. They get the park upgrade. But probably most importantly, or at least alongside them being cheap, they are going up against a pitcher that's likely to be close to 40% owned. They aren't a bad offense as far as hitting goes. They've been league average in terms of production so far this year. They'll probably be better than that by the end of the season. So if the Mariners just happen to hit some home runs here off of Gil, which isn't likely to happen, but if it does, you're just in a really, really good spot in large field tournaments. So I can see getting to them because of the negative correlation and the cheap prices. You see these guys here at the top. Mitch Garver, Luke Raley, Dylan Moore, Dominic Canzone, all hitting 2 through 5 and all 3,600 or less on DraftKings. Rodriguez is 4,900. He's the only guy in this lineup that is remotely expensive at all. JP Crawford leading off at 3,300. They are getting some ownership as well because they're so cheap. So it's not so much a contrarian stack. Not that the ownership is problematic, but it's not so much a contrarian stack in the sense that they themselves aren't getting any ownership, but it does negatively correlate with one of the most popular pitchers on the slate. Next, we have the Giants taking on the Pirates in Pittsburgh. 14 runs or something scored in this game last night, surprisingly, but looks like a good spot for at least one pitcher today. Paul Skeens on the mound for the Pirates. He's made 2 major league starts so far. He has looked great overall. Strikeouts have been there, coming off of an absolutely dominant start last time out against the Cubs. Through those 2 starts, a 46% strikeout percentage. Obviously, that is not going to hold, but the stuff is incredible. He's just a really, really, really good pitcher. Some of the best stuff in baseball already. Average matchup against the Giants, 107 WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year. Middle of the pack in terms of strikeouts, but at 9,500, he looks really good. Getting 32% ownership, showed up in 31% of the lineups I built. And yeah, good call from Sean V in chat as well. Skeens threw 100 pitches last time out. There's no reason to be viewing him as, the Pirates are being cautious with him. Maybe he's not going to throw as many pitches as other guys. He's full go, and he is arguably the most talented pitcher on the slate. Obviously Heel and Castillo have great stuff as well. And we're talking about 2 major league starts, but his minor league stuff was fantastic. He just looks amazing. So really, really likes getting the Skeens here. Mason Black at 5,500 is purely a value punt if you need it. Pitching on this slate probably seems really good because so far we've already talked about Castillo, Heel, and Skeens, but it drops off pretty quickly over the rest of the show. So if you wanted to punt SP2, Black is cheap, does have a decent matchup, but nothing, really to say about him as far as why I'd want to get there. 7% ownership, 7% of the lineups I built have him. Offensively, the Giants are showing up as the least frequent stack in the lineups I built. The Pirates are 3rd from the bottom. 5-mans, the Pirates move up a little bit. Giants are 2nd from the bottom. I don't have too much interest in the offenses here. I would expect to get to the Pirates first. Eric Miller is expected to open for the Giants. Mason Black is expected to be the long guy last I saw. But Black still expected to be the bulk guy, at least as of like 30 minutes ago. So not overly interested in either offense here. I would get to the Pirates first. O'Neal Cruz individually getting some ownership at 4,400 at shortstop, pulling 15%. I think that's a little bit high, but he does look like the best hitter in this game to me as well. McCutchen's pretty cheap. Chapman is cheap, but obviously has the brutal matchup against Skeens. Lamont Wade's been fantastic this season, but again, brutal matchup against Skeens. So overall, not really interested too much in offenses here. Brian Reynolds is getting some ownership, getting 14%. Again, I think that's a little bit high, but he is reasonably priced at 4,300. So I would get to the Pirates first. I just don't love either offense. Next, we have Texas taking on the Phillies. Zach Wheeler is going for the Phillies. So another ace on this slate. Andrew Heaney on the other side for Texas. 29 to 30% ownership coming into Wheeler. Showed up in about 22% of the lineups I built. He is a really good pitcher, striking out 29% of hitters this year. 3.09 xFIP. One of the best pitchers on the slate, along with Heel, Castillo, and Skeens in terms of talent. Tough matchup against the Rangers. I saw somebody mention in chat that their lineup looks a little bit weak, but it's still just a bunch of good hitters overall in this lineup. On the other side for Heaney, tough matchup against the Phillies, tough park to pitch in. 6,800, getting 8% ownership looks perfectly fine to me. Again, we don't really have good cheap pitching on this slate for the most part. The good pitching is all pretty expensive. So the guys that you would be paying down for, like Heaney, like Mason Black, they're not great pitchers. You're kind of just hoping to run good, and that's fine. Offensively, the Phillies look good here. We know Andrew Heaney gives up a lot of power. This park plays up power. There's a lot to like. Phillies have a lot of good hitters. 193 expected ISO allowed to righties this year for Heaney. 203 to lefties. 117 to lefties since last year. 205 to righties. So we know that right-handed power is there. He also, so far this year, hasn't been lights out against lefties. Schwarber and Harper both hit lefties really well. I wouldn't be shying away from them. JT Realmuto looks like a really good play at 5,200. If you can afford him, obviously one of the better hitting catchers on the slate. The Phillies stacks are showing up middle of the pack as far as all stack types go. They get pushed down a little bit in 5-mans because they are pretty expensive with Real Muto, Harper, Schwarber, all priced above 5K. Alec Baum is 5,600. So it's tough, or it can be tough to 5-man stack them because pitching or paying up for pitching is probably going to be a priority from a roster construction standpoint, just because of the talent at the top end on this slate. So that can make it tough to full stack them, but getting whatever Phillies you can into lineups is going to look pretty good. On the other side, the Rangers certainly have talent, but they also have a very difficult matchup against Wheeler. They are showing up middle of the pack from a stack standpoint for me, and I think it's probably a couple of things pushing them up. For one, there's some value here. So like Andrew Kisner showed up in 10% of the lineups I built. I don't necessarily think that holds in the final run that I do before lock. He's not a good hitter. He's just showing up because he's 2,100 and it opens the door for me to get up to expensive pitching. So I wouldn't be surprised if if part of the reason that we're seeing Texas stacks show up is just like random mini stacks where it's like Andrew Kisner plus Josh Smith so that I can get to good pitching. That's not necessarily something I really want to get to. It's not something that I necessarily think I'll be getting to by lock. But I do think the better argument for Texas is that Wheeler is getting 30% ownership. And let's say you're playing a lineup that has Paul Skeens and Luis Heel. You already need Wheeler not to be great. It makes some sense to be getting to Texas bats against him. Now, that's not, it is entirely true, but that's not the full picture, because if you're playing like Skeens and Heel, if Wheeler scores 24 DraftKings points, the Rangers probably didn't do anything, but he could still lose to Skeens and Heel. Like, that's a very likely or reasonable outcome to expect. So it's not to say that if you're not playing Wheeler, you should just be jamming Rangers in because you need Wheeler to have a bad game. You don't. But that's one reason that you could see the Rangers get pushed up a little bit. They're not getting any ownership. They are a talented offense. But again, Wheeler is a very good pitcher. It's a low probability spot. He doesn't give up a lot of power. 185 expected ISO to lefties this year, sub 100 to righties. Since last year, only 154 to lefties, also sub 100 to righties. So I can see getting to Texas as a contrarian stack. They do have that negative correlation piece as well, but very low probability spot against a very good pitcher in Wheeler. Now we go to another good hitters park with the Padres taking on the Reds. Matt Waldron on the mound for the Padres. Frankie Montas going for the Reds. Waldron's getting some ownership here, and I actually think it's a little bit low. He showed up in about 16% of the lineups I built. Field's projected to have about 10%. He's not a great pitcher, but he does have a 22.5% K percentage this year, 4.15 xFIP. Certainly serviceable numbers here. Going up against a Reds team that has the second highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year, 82 WRC plus in the Reds lineup as well. Now, Waldron does get a huge park downgrade going from Petco to Cincinnati, but the salary is just really, really cheap. I mentioned it a couple times already. We don't have lights out, stud, cheap pitchers on this slate. So I don't mind getting to some Waldron where I do need to pay down at SP2. Frankie Montas is more difficult to get to. Really tough strikeout matchup against the Padres. Really tough park to pitch in. Montas himself only striking out 16% of hitters with a 5.1 xFIP this year. So it's tough to get to that $7,500 price tag. Offensively, no problem getting to either team in this game because of the park. Cincinnati showing up second most often. San Diego showing up third most. In all stack types, they flip-flop in 5-mans with San Diego second and Cincinnati third. But the offenses here are going to look good. Jacob Hurtubise leading off again at close to minimum salary for the Reds. I see people talking about him in chat. He projects to be a slightly below average hitter in the majors. He has basically no power, but he can run. Stole 45 bases between AA and AAA last season at 2,200 leading off. He has upside just because of the stolen bases. And then, obviously in this park, anything can happen offensively, but he can run. So that is too cheap of a price tag for him. He's projected for 22% ownership, showed up in 19% of the lineups I built. I'm not playing cash. I haven't built any cash lineups, but I would assume that $2,200 Hurtubise is a pretty key piece in cash lineups so that you can get to good pitching. Ellie De La Cruz at 6,300 looks great if you can find that salary. Not a bad matchup against Waldron. Great park. He'll be hitting from the left side of the plate, which is his preferred side as well. 355 expected WOBA and 201 expected ISO to lefties for Waldron this year. He's had pretty drastic splits. Going back to last season as well as this season, lefties do a lot more damage against him. Candelario is reasonably priced at 3,900. Mike Ford batting cleanup at 4K getting a lot of ownership, probably a little bit too much considering he's first base only, but certainly power upside there. The Padres are getting ownership as well. Tatis, Cronenworth, Arise, Machado, all these guys look very, very good. I like getting to the offenses in this game. I like getting to Waldron as an SP2 as well. One other positive for Waldron here, in addition to just him being cheap and relatively low owned at 10%, is you do see the ownership coming into the Reds. Normally, when we talk about negative correlation to the field, we're talking about getting to relatively unappealing stacks against good pitchers, but it does apply the opposite direction as well. You have all of these Reds that are really popular. If Waldron just goes out there and strikes out a bunch of guys and doesn't give up any runs, you do have a high percentage of the field not getting bats. So it's not as strong when you go with it that direction, but it does still exist. Arcatels has said no Montas is a punt. I don't really see it. He's not that cheap at 7,500. The matchup sucks. He's been really bad this year. The case that I would make for him is like he's 2% owned on a 6-game slate. That's really the only case that I can make for him. He didn't show up in the lineups I built. He showed up in 4%, so I don't even think he's going that under-owned. Next, we have Atlanta taking on the Cubs in Chicago. I actually did not look at the weather for this game, and I probably should. Looks like wind blowing in at around 10 miles an hour, so nothing too crazy weather-related here. We don't have lineups in this game. Austin Riley has missed a bunch of time. He's not on the injured list yet, so I assume I'll be late swapping out of him. But we have AJ Smith-Shawver on the mound for Atlanta. Ben Brown going for the Cubs. Neither pitcher showing up for me. Neither pitcher is expected to be popular. I don't really have any case to make for either one. Ben Brown does have solid enough strikeout stuff. 26.7% K percentage so far this season. Overall, including time out of the bullpen, but it is a tough matchup against the Braves, and I don't expect him to go that deep into this game. Kyle Hendricks was moved to the bullpen for Chicago, so I think you could see a piggyback situation here where Hendricks follows Brown. Brown also has thrown a couple innings at a time recently. He pitched like 4 days ago. I'm expecting we get like 4 innings or so out of him. It's just tough to want to get to Brown in this spot with some sort of a limit. Offensively, happy to get to the Braves. The field's getting to the main guys, Acuna, Albies, Olsen, quite a bit, but then the ownership drops off. They're showing up as an under-owned team for me. Again, it's not a great matchup against Brown, but he probably is going to be somewhat limited. He is a young pitcher as well, and you just have a ton of talent in the Braves lineup. Austin Riley is the piece that is probably going to be really annoying because I don't really know what to do other than project him in since he's not on the injured list. But if he doesn't play, you start making pretty frustrating swaps. If he doesn't play, though, the Braves do get a little bit cheaper, which is nice. But Acuna, Albies, Olsen all look good here. I like getting to Ozuna at low ownership at 5,700. The Arnaud at 4K looks pretty good. So the Braves as a relatively low-owned stack, top to bottom, look good to me. They showed up the most in all stack types. They showed up the most in 5-mans. And the field's just not really getting there. So I do like them despite a less than appealing matchup against Ben Brown. So far this year, Brown has allowed a 192 expected ISO to lefties and a 189 expected ISO to righties in a limited sample. He strikes guys out at a high rate, like I said, but production has been there. So that combined with the potential of like maybe Kyle Hendricks following him makes the Braves look good to me. Finally, wrapping things up with Colorado at Oakland, the pitcher that I really do not want to talk about because he killed me last time. But Ryan Feltner on the mound for the Rockies. Joey Estes is going for the A's. Not surprisingly, both of these guys are getting ownership because they're cheap and they are facing the Rockies and the A's. Feltner has been solid overall this year. He was awful last time out, but 19.4% K percentage, 4.04 xFIP, significant park upgrade going into Oakland. Good strikeout matchup against the A's, who have the third highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They have hit well overall. They've been struggling a bit more recently, but they have a 182 ISO, 115 WRC plus. Also that really high strikeout percentage, though. He's only 6K flat. Sean V said there's no way to trust Feltner. There's no way to trust any pitcher on this slate that isn't named Skeens or Heel or Castillo or Wheeler. And even, two of those guys have tough matchups. So it's a price play. It's a matchup play. It's a park play. But yeah, if Feltner fails, nobody should be surprised. He is only 6K, though. On the other side, Joey Estes, basically the same thing. 6,500 going up against the Rockies, getting 22 to 23% ownership. 20% of the lineups I built have him. So I think the field is pretty much correct on Estes, maybe a little bit high. I do have Feltner going a little bit under-owned here. Again, I just like Feltner. Feltner grades out a little bit better in my stuff than in most industry projections. So it leads to me thinking he's going a little bit under-owned. But they are very similar plays. You're using them because they're cheap, not because you have confidence in them. Colorado has the fourth highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year, despite playing their home games in one of the most difficult parks to strike out in. 88 WRC plus as well, just a below average offense. They both look fine. If you want to get to the offense this year, I think that is fine as well. Colorado is showing up fourth most often in all stack types, Oakland closer to the bottom. In five mans, Oakland drops all the way down. Colorado remains at fourth. Neither of these pitchers are great. Again, I think Feltner is likely a better pitcher than Estes, but we saw this the other day when you had Quantrill against Brooks. It didn't work out. Quantrill had like the best game he'll probably ever have in his career, but you're getting two pitchers that around 1/5 of the field are going to roster simply because of their salaries, not because they're particularly good. It just gives you a very clear negative correlation spot. Like when you think about the pitchers getting ownership on this slate, you can stack against Luis Castillo. You can stack against Luis Gil. Neither of those are bad given the park, but they're obviously two really good pitchers. You can stack against Paul Skeens if you want to. I don't want to. You can stack against Zach Wheeler. Not particularly appealing. Or at similar ownership, you can stack against Ryan Feltner or Joey Estes. Like that seems more appealing to me, even though the park isn't as good as some of those others. Julian said no Riley or d'Arnaud for Atlanta. That's going to make that lineup look a lot less appealing to stack for sure than it did when I ran lineups. So it makes them cheaper, but those guys not being in the lineup certainly makes them less appealing to get to. So yeah, from a stacking standpoint with Colorado and Oakland, it's, the park sucks. Most of the hitters suck, but they're not getting much ownership individually. They do negatively correlate with opposing pitchers. So in tournaments, I do think they make sense. Tovar, Diaz, McMahon, Rogers, middle of the order for the Rockies, certainly good. Shea Langoliers just hits the ball really, really hard. I like getting there. His salary is just not moving, despite being one of the highest upside catchers on any slate that he's on. Brett Harris is cheap if you need the value, but I think the middle of the order for Colorado looks pretty good. I like Langoliers individually. Geloff and Rooker look fine as well. Chris Bryant's back for the Rockies for whatever that's worth. I assume he's not any good at this point, but he doesn't play enough for us to actually know. So overall, just a game where I expect to get a lot of exposure, whether it's offensively in lineups where I'm paying up for pitching. They're going to fit nicely because of their salaries. In lineups where I'm getting a more expensive stack, bats or pitching are going to fit, either a cheap mini stack or value pitching. So really, really important game here for DFS purposes. So to recap, the top pitching on this slate: Paul Skeens, Luis Gil, Zach Wheeler, a little bit of a drop-off, Luis Castillo. Value pitching: Ryan Feltner, Joey Estes, Matt Waldron. I wouldn't say I really have a favorite contrarian pitcher. I think the field is a little bit low on Feltner and Waldron, but it's not like they aren't getting any ownership. I guess considering Waldron's 10% and Estes is 22 and Feltner's 23, I guess Waldron counts as contrarian. I would say he's my favorite. From a stacking standpoint, I did really like the Braves. I assume I'm going to like them less now that we got their lineup. Cincinnati, San Diego, I like a lot. Colorado looks good. I didn't mention the Cubs. I think I forgot to actually talk about them. They look like a middle of the road stack as well. But Colorado, from a contrarian / negative leverage standpoint, I like. And I really like getting to the offenses in the San Diego-Cincinnati game. Home run pick, I'll go back to Juan Soto. Gave me 2 yesterday. I feel like it's kind of cheating just picking him every day, but as long as he's facing good pitchers, I think it's okay. So I'll take him again against Castillo. Struggles with left-handed power in Yankee Stadium. Pretty interesting slate, like Stephen Leibowitz just said. Looking forward to seeing how my lineups look. I think there's a lot of negatively correlated teams you can get to, different spots you can get to, some good pitching at the top, and then a bunch of question marks. So should be pretty fun. Good luck on your lineups. Thanks for checking out the show, and I'll see you back here at the normal time at noon tomorrow.